if you spent, you'd be out of money. You wouldn't be able to do any more mitzvahs. So that's obviously can't be the way to go. So we're supposed to not spend more than a fifth, right? We're not supposed to spend more than a fifth of our money on any mitzvah, and that's the basic idea here. You shouldn't spend more than a fifth of your net worth on any mitzvah, which, if we think about it in today's times, that could be an amazing amount of money. I mean, you're talking about, right, a fifth of our net worth if we factor in our houses and our cars and our pension funds and everything else. So you talk about, I mean, there would be the practice. This is why we don't give practical shiurim here. We only go look in depth because the practicalities of this is way too complicated for a 45-minute class. But that's the essential idea, that you shouldn't spend too much money on mitzvahs. In which case, that begs the question of, okay, if I'm not going to spend too much money on mitzvahs, how much money should I be spending on any mitzvah, right? What's the proper amount? How much should I be spending? And that's obviously the question that we have to look at. So, and this is where Rabbi Akiva comes along. If we just move myself out of the way here, but this is where Rabbi Akiva comes along and says, right, this is our Gemara in Shabbos. It says, right, that it's better to make your Shabbat like a weekday and not need to take charity. In other words, if my usual Shabbat is one of meat and delicacies and it gets very expensive, so, and I can't afford it this Shabbat. Let's say I took a financial downturn and I couldn't afford it. So then maybe I think, I should keep up my Shabbos level, and in order to afford that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and spend and take money from charity in order to do that. So Rikiva says, no, it's more important for you to not take money from charity and make your Shabbat look like a weekday and just have regular weekday food, rather than go ahead and do make a Shabbat make your Shabbat one that you go into debt for. So that doesn't work. But it does beg the question, though, of what was Rabbi Akiva's svara? How did he come to this conclusion? Right? How did he come to the conclusion that it's more important for you to make your Shabbat like a weekday than to take money from charity? Right? If somebody needs charity money, then they need charity money. There's nothing wrong with taking money from charity if you need it. Right? There's no great that if I actually need charity money, I shouldn't take it. That's not a smart way and not a practical way of living. If I need charity, I need charity. So what did Rabbi Akiva come off and say? That it's better, the value is higher to make your Shabbat like a weekday rather than take tzedakah money. So we're going to have to explain that. Okay. The Rambam talked about, we saw this, the idea of Oneg Shabbos, of enjoying your Shabbos, right? And we wanted to understand what the idea behind Oneg Shabbos is, right? This is what we saw in the next two sources. The idea of what Oneg Shabbat, pleasuring Shabbat, is all about. We have two ideas. We have Kavod Shabbat and Oneg Shabbat. We generally look at the two of them as we say that Kavod Shabbat is preparing for Shabbat. Everything that you do that's honoring Shabbat, everything you do before Shabbat to prepare for Shabbat is Kavod Shabbat. Anything you do on Shabbat to actually enjoy Shabbat, by enjoying the preparation. So cooking my cholent and prepping my cholent and cooking it on Friday afternoon, that's honoring Shabbat. That's the mitzvah of Kavod Shabbat. But when it comes to the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbat, that's eating my cholent. Eating my cholent is Oneg Shabbat, right? That's the difference between them. So we do want to understand what the idea of Oneg Shabbat is. You can see the Rambam here says Ezu Oneg, right? He says this is Zesha Amru Chachamim Shetzarech Takein Tavshil Shamen Bioter Mashkim Mebusam. It's a lot about food. It's all physical pleasures. As the Oneg Shabbat is not going on Friday night and singing, or maybe singing is your pleasure of Shabbat, but it's not going to a great shiur. It's not Oneg Shabbat. It's very clear that Oneg Shabbat is about the physical. It's about enjoying yourself, right? But then you see the last line of the Rambam here in source number 5. The Rambam says, "Amru Chacham Harishonim Osei Shabbat Chachol V'al Titzarech Labrios." The Rambam qualifies it though with Rabbi Akiva's teaching and says, "Yeah, this is all important. It's all very important to enjoy Shabbat." But you can only enjoy Shabbat by assuming that you can afford it. If you can't afford it, then there's no mitzvah of Oneg Shabbat. That's how the Rambam takes Rabbi Akiva practically. Okay. This next source was very hard for me to learn. I was shocked when I saw this. Absolutely shocked. I had no idea that this was the tour's personal life situation. It was really it was like almost shocking to me that the tour lived this way. The tour is one of our great rabbis. He lived in around the year 1300. His father was one of our great rabbis, the Rush, and he brings this up and without any embarrassment writes about his own precarious financial situation when he was alive. And it's painful to read this. He says that a bunch of times he spoke to his father, right? And he says, "What's the situation? Someone like me, I can't afford to spend money on Shabbat. I don't have it." Right? It says, I'm personally in a situation right now, the Torah writes, where I need to take money from other people. I don't have enough money. Right? So do I fit into this category? You see, he asks his father the question, should I make my Shabbat like a chol? Should I make it like a weekday? That's his question. He says, "V'lo shivani davar baros." He says it's amazing. His father didn't give him a clear answer. It's amazing to think about. These are two of the greatest rabbis that we've ever had amongst the Jewish people, the Torah and the Rush, and their father's son. And the son asks his father in serious financial straits, should I make my Shabbat like a weekday? Should I just continue having the same food that I have during the week? And his father doesn't answer him, which is like amazing. His father wrote tons of responses. I'm talking about like hundreds and hundreds of responses during his lifetime. And he wrote a whole explanation of the Gemara in Halacha. So the one question the Rush doesn't answer is his father's. His son's, excuse me. It's got to blow you away how he doesn't answer. He doesn't answer this question. It's incredible. So he says, and then he brings up that when he was investigating on his own to try to figure out the answer of his own situation, he found this explanation of Rashi on Pirkei Avos, and Rashi says that it's very important. He says that this idea of making your Shabbat like a chol and not taking is only if you really, really are in financial straits. I mean, like you really have nothing, not like things are tight now, right? And therefore we got to tighten our belts and cut back on the budget. But it can only be where you really, really have nothing. Like he says the words I take it also. He says where's the words? Excuse me for a second. It says somebody who's the situation he's in is incredibly difficult. But a person really has to strive hard to afford Shabbos. So he says, like, so it's only the poorest of the poor does Rabbi Akiva's teaching apply to. It's incredible when you think about the personal situation, and then and there's the back and forth with his father, and then he goes ahead and says that this halacha really only applies to really serious situations. It's when we read Rabbi Akiva the first time, at least when I read it the first time. So you imagine that it's when it says that you shouldn't take from charity, so you don't imagine that it's talking about somebody who's literally on his last pennies, right? And therefore he really can't afford Shabbos. But that's how the Torah came to his own understanding of it. That it's not something that he should go ahead and avail himself of this luxury, so to speak, of not putting out a lot of money for Shabbat. That's not the idea. The idea is you really, unless it's really, really necessary, you have to put out money for Shabbat. Even if it's, if times are tough, that's where you have to put your money. Okay, interesting. I found that fascinating. Okay, any questions so far? Good? Okay, great. So going on. Okay. Okay, so the Gemara in Beitza says like this. This is like if we would have different sections of the shiur. So this would be a different section. This would be the next section that we would have. The Gemara says like this. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael B'ni Levu Alai V'Kitshu Kedushos Hayom V'Amidu Bi V'Ani Poreya. So it's like quoting God. And God says to the Jewish people, don't worry. take it on my account. I'll be able to I'll pay you back, right? When you're going out shopping on for Shabbos and right, and you want to go get stuff for Shabbos, so it's on me. You don't worry about it. Just put it on the credit card, and I'll pay it back. I'm going to be handling the credit card bill this week. So that's an amazing thing. I mean, yeah, like that doesn't sound too much like the rational Judaism that we're used to, right? That just put it on God and God will handle it, right? And that's why you start seeing the Rishonim tell us that this is not the way it should be. Toso says, right? This is source number 8. So Tosos brings up the obvious question. Wait a minute, what about Rabbi Akiva's teaching? If this is true, that God pays us back, then Rabbi Akiva's teaching doesn't make any sense, right? Why would I ever have to make my Shabbat like a weekday? I'll just simply go to the supermarket. I've got God's credit card. I'll ask God to cover it, and then we're going to have steaks, and we're going to have veal, and we're going to have lamb, and everything's going to be great this Shabbat. I don't even have to worry about it because it's on God. So Tosos says, no, this is only right if you have no way of paying it back, then you can rely on God. It's a very, very limited situation when you can avail yourself of this idea of God covering your expenses. Okay, but it's not something that it's only when you have no way. You do not know how. There's nothing coming in. There's no clients coming in. There's no contracts coming in. You don't have a job anymore, and there's no way you can see at all of getting this money back. Then you can rely on it. The Gra disagrees with Tosos, okay, and the Gra says, it doesn't mean when you have no way of paying it back. The Gra says that what it really should say, and he's not just really disagreeing with Tosos, he's saying that there's a printer's error in Tosos. He's saying that what it should say, what Tosos really meant to say, or really, I guess he would say what Tosos did say, and what the printer printed wrong, it's if you have no one you could borrow from. If I can't go to the bank and get a short-term loan for to cover my Shabbat expenses, then I can rely on God. But if I can get a loan from somebody else, go to them before you go to God. Okay, so but we do, although they're not really disagreeing. I don't know if the Gra's just disagreeing with the printer, but there are two different ways of understanding this. Is it that when you can't, when you have no way of paying it back, as our version of Tosos says, or is it when you have nobody that you can borrow from? Is that the idea? Okay, so that's our debate, and that's another question that we have. Okay, Tosos says as follows. It says, right? So this only applies. So this is Tosos and Psachim says that the idea of Rabbi Akiva's teaching that we should make Shabbat like a weekday only applies if you have the money, which led us to our question of, if I have the money, what do I need God for, right? What's the idea there? That doesn't hold really. It doesn't make too much sense. Okay. Going on, the Rambam talks about there's a mitzvah of oneg on Yom Tov, right? We have to enjoy our Yom Tov just like on Shabbat. There's a mitzvah of both, and which led us to the question of, okay, so if there's a mitzvah of both, so then does this teaching of Rabbi Akiva apply on Yom Tov? Okay, and then we saw the Meiri. This is source number 11. The Meiri says that, hold on a second, no, we have a whole different understanding. The Meiri says. He says that this only applies that you should make your Shabbat like a weekday as regards to Kiddush, right? We're talking about the actual mitzvos of the day. We're not talking about like your steak and your, right? This is only talking about Kiddush, right? So it's right. So Kiddush Hayom, right? He says that that then you can borrow on a Kadosh Baruch Hu's account, right? Then if I have no money. I have no money, and I look at my thing. I say, okay, this week I guess we're just making Shabbos like a weekday, right? We're just gonna make like a regular week, spaghetti and meatballs, right? Or I guess that might even be too much. We're just gonna have peanut butter and jelly this Shabbat. That's what we've got. Okay, so and then you say, well, I can't afford wine, so wine you can go ahead and put it on God's credit card. You can assume that God is going to pay you back, which is still still a wonder that we say such a thing. Okay, so far everything good? I know we're doing a lot of review, but I want to make sure that we've got it. This is our first week back. Okay, so then we asked the question about two other mitzvos. So far we've been saying, right, from the very beginning, that we shouldn't spend too much money on mitzvos. And on Shabbos, it's better not to spend a lot of money on mitzvos on Shabbos, and it's better to make your Shabbos like a weekday. Okay, so I would assume that this goes across the board on all the mitzvos. Right? On all the mitzvos, this goes across the board, that I shouldn't spend too much money on my mitzvos. And when it comes time to to fulfill mitzvos, so I should only fulfill mitzvos. I should only spend a certain amount on my mitzvos. And if I can't afford the mitzvahs, then I don't do the mitzvah. Right? That's what I would assume. There's no reason for me to think that this only applies on Shabbos. Right? Does everybody see that? Right, so why would I assume that this? Yes, it's true. Rabbi Akiva says, "Say Shabbos chol." You should make your Shabbos chol. But why would I assume that only applies to Shabbos? I should assume that applies to every mitzvah that there is in the Torah. Every mitzvah I'm not supposed to spend so much money on. So if I'm not supposed to spend so much money on every mitzvah, then every mitzvah I shouldn't go into debt for. I shouldn't have to rely on charity for. Right? Everybody sees that? Yeah. I hope that makes sense. But that's not true. Right? And that's logic would tell us that our intuition should lead us in that direction. But if you look at source number 12 and source number 13, we bring up two different mitzvos that the halacha is that we go into debt in order to do them. Right? That we do have to go into debt. It flies in the face of Rabbi Akiva. The first one is when it comes to the daled kosos, the 4 cups of wine that we have on Pesach. If I can't afford the 4 cups of wine on Pesach, right? So then I have to go ahead and I have to borrow money. I have to do different things, right? I have to go into debt, right? That's the halacha. So in order to afford the 4 cups of wine, now it doesn't mean for my Pesach Seder meal I should do that, but for the 4 cups of wine, if I don't have them, then I should go. The halacha is that I have to, if I'm already on charity, right? This is how the Shulchan Aruch introduces the halacha. I'm already on charity. Everything I have comes through welfare. So I'm already on welfare now. Right? And now I'm sitting there and saying, okay, every Shabbos so far this whole year I've been on welfare. I've been taking money from charity. And every Shabbos so far, I've made my Shabbos like a weekday because I can't afford that. I can't afford to make it like a Shabbos. Now comes the time for 4 cups. And what should I go ahead and do? And now I've got to go ahead and I've got to borrow money, right? Or even sell my clothing. That's how important this is. So how does that work? How does that fit into what we've been saying so far? And it's not only the 4 cups of wine, but it's also the Hanukkah candles, this is a huge, this should disturb us tremendously because without a doubt, okay, there's one go in the Bahag that holds that this is from the Torah, but everybody else thinks that Hanukkah is rabbinic, right? So this is rabbinic now. Is saying that that the Rambam says that afilu ein lo mayocho. If I have nothing to eat, the only thing I have to eat is I go to like a food bank, right? Or I go to a food kitchen, and I literally get my meals prepared for me, and I eat it there with the other poor people. So then I have to go borrow or sell my clothes. And again, I want to make something very clear. When the Rambam writes mocher suso, okay, when he says that you should sell your clothes, this wasn't a time where people had multiple clothing. People only had one outfit for the week and one outfit for Shabbat. Because the halacha talks about when you don't have that much money and you only have one outfit, and then how to fold up your clothes to make them special for Shabbat, even though they're the exact same clothes you wore yesterday. People had 1 or 2 outfits, and now they're saying, and a poor person for sure only had 1 outfit. So they're saying, so sell that outfit, sell that. I don't know what you wear at that point, but he says sell that in order to have Hanukkah candles, right? And again, let's also keep in mind, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Hanukkah candles, today we do this like in the best of ways because Hanukkah candles are so cheap. But in order to fulfill the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah, you need 1 candle. 1 candle every night is enough. You fulfill your mitzvah. So we're talking about a person that really has no money, and now we say that a person he should sell his last possession, the shirt, literally the shirt off his back, he should sell in order to afford this. Okay, so those are our questions. That's what perplexes us. And in order to answer, so like we do every time, we've got to come up with an explanation. And we have a couple of things that bother us here, right? So we have to understand Rabbi Akiva's teaching as a whole, right? Then we have to understand the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos, to understand Rabbi Akiva's teaching in context, right? Because what Rabbi Akiva is saying is that you should make your Shabbos like a weekday. But what are we giving up on, right? What does that mean, make your Shabbos like a weekday? What are we really giving up on? right? What's the novelty? What's the chiddush of his teaching? So the chiddush of his teaching is he's saying give up on Oneg Shabbos. He's not saying that you should go to work on Shabbos, right? He's not saying that you should violate Shabbat. He's not saying that, right? He doesn't say that anywhere, right? What he's talking about is the only thing that he's saying that you should give up is Oneg Shabbat. That's all that we're giving up, okay? So we have to understand Rabbi Akiva's teaching. The only way to understand it is to understand what he means, and then to also understand what Oneg Shabbat is, okay? And to understand that, okay. We do want to understand the Gemaras on what it means to borrow on God's account, and the debate between the Gra and Tosfos on that, how we understand that. Okay, and then ultimately what we want to get to is understand this question about from the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch about other mitzvos, about the Hanukkah candles and the 4 cups, and then we want to understand does Rabbi Akiva's. This is how I got to the question. The way I got to this question was I wanted to understand, does this apply to Yom Tov as well? Okay, that was my question. Because I'm not sure if it applies to Yom Tov. I don't know what you think. Because on the one hand, Rabbi Akiva is very specific. He says Shabbat. On the other hand, there's just, the Rambam wrote, just like there's look at inside, just like there's a mitzvah. Yes, if you look in source number 10 here, just like on Shabbos you have to, so on Yom Tov also. So would this apply on Yom Tov? Okay, everybody understand? Good. Okay. So so let's get to a svara here. Okay. Okay. So here's my question for you. If I would ask you, and this will hopefully lead us along the way here. If I would ask you, what is how does one fulfill the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos? What does one have to do? So how would you answer that question? How would you go ahead and answer the question of how one fulfills in one sentence? I'll tell you like this. Let me give you context to my question here. If I would ask you, how does one fulfill the mitzvah of living in the sukkah? Right, so it's a pretty simple answer, right? You do whatever you do in your house during the rest of the year. That's what you should do in the sukkah. So you eat in your house. Now you eat in the sukkah. You sleep in your house. You should ideally sleep in the sukkah. You read in the house. You watch TV in the house. So that you should do in your sukkah, right? That's how I fulfill the mitzvah sukkah. How do I fulfill the mitzvah tefillin? Right. So how do I fulfill the mitzvah tefillin? Pretty simple. I tie the tefillin onto my arm. Okay. How do I fulfill the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos now? What do I do? What would you say?
It's centered around the Sugyah for Shabbos. Your Oneg is centered around the food on your table with your family.
But what I'm saying, what do I do?
You're eating your Sugyah. You have a Sugyah around the table with your family, and you're eating foods that not necessarily you would have during the week.
Okay, so that's a lot.
You have the special foods.
Okay, so you're telling me that Oneg Shabbos is having special food on Shabbat. Okay, so does that mean that is there something as an objective special food that I should have? Is there something I should go out? Is there such a thing as Shabbos food?
Well, traditionally, as an example, cholent.
Okay, so you say cholent. So on Wednesday I make a stew, and on Thursday I make I don't know chili, and on Shabbos I'm essentially making the exact same thing. I'm just going to call it cholent. Right? All those dishes are real. I mean, there might be like 1 or 2 ingredients that are different, and I'm not the chef to talk here. But right, well, what does that mean? That it's what makes it Shabbos food?
That's why there are people that would only have the cholent or the soup only on Shabbos. They make things special on Shabbos that they don't have during the week.
Okay, so you say so now what you're saying is you should have unique food, right? There should be food that's unique to you on Shabbat.
For the
Shabbos
table, right?
Right, the Shabbos. Okay, fine. So that's
right.
So,
your Shabbat chalot, your wine.
Okay, so that's great, except for one problem is that we don't say that, right? That does that would definitely, I think it would fit Oneg Shabbos, right? But if you look at what the mitzvah of Shabbos, of Oneg Shabbos is, right? So right, so here's Ezehu Oneg, the Rambam says it's got to be like extra fatty. Umashkim mevusam l'Shabbos, good like flavorful drinks. Everything that a person can afford, right? So he's not saying, the Rambam doesn't, when he describes this mitzvah, he doesn't give like an objective thing. And I think that's the point that I want to make here, is that Oneg Shabbos, the way you fulfill this mitzvah, is very subjective, right? It's subjective to what you enjoy. What one person's Oneg is another person's nightmare, right? Like, oh my God, I can't believe we're eating this, right? Like put a filter fish in front of a Sfardi, right? And they're gonna start like vomiting. They're gonna say, I don't want, this is gross. I don't want to eat this, right? How could this doesn't look appetizing at all. But for an Ashkenazi, right? So the filter fish is what makes the Shabbos meal, right? Basar v'dagim mechol matamim. So right, we say, so Oneg Shabbos is very subjective, right? That's what it comes down to. It's very subjective. On Yom Tov, we find a different phenomenon in halacha. We find for the only time on Yom Tov, we find objective pleasure. It's an amazing thing. Objective. This is objectively pleasurable. What are we talking about? We're going to stick. We only have men in this year, so we'll stick to men. So objectively, right? That what's Oneg Shabbos? Basar v'yayin, meat and wine. That's objectively, right? That's what gives me simcha. Okay. Now you'll say, hold on a second.
Yom Tov.
That's on Yom Tov, right? So you'll say, hold on, simcha and oneg, right? And you'd be correct on this one, are two different mitzvahs. Okay, they're two different mitzvahs. Oneg is like what we talked about, enjoying everything we've been saying about oneg so far, and simcha is a different mitzvah. Samachta b'chagecha, right? You should be happy on your festivals. Okay, so now let me ask you a question. If they're really separate things, and they are separate. They're from different psukim. They're different halachos, right? We learn oneg ideally is its places on Shabbos, but the Rambam says that there's also oneg on Yom Tov. But clearly, oneg and Yom Tov coincide. Oneg, on Yom Tov and Simcha coincide, right? If I'm eating my basar, my meat, on Yom Tov, that clearly provides me pleasure, which fulfills both Simcha and oneg, right? So yes, there's a mitzvah of oneg on Yom Tov, right? There's also a mitzvah of oneg on Yom Tov, but it runs through and through with Simcha. What Simcha comes and does and says, listen, if you are oneg Shabbos every week is like caramel popcorn, right? We only have caramel popcorn on Shabbos for dessert, and I love caramel popcorn, so we're gonna have caramel popcorn on Shabbos, okay? And that's oneg, and that's oneg on Yom Tov as well. But that you can't fulfill simcha with the caramel popcorn. The simcha on Yom Tov has to be through meat. That's the only way. I have to have meat. Okay, so that's objective. And here's the difference between oneg and simcha on Yom Tov and oneg on Shabbat. Oneg on Shabbat is subjective to each person. Simcha and oneg on Yom Tov is objective. Our rabbis told us this is what you have to have, right? You have to have meat on Yom Tov. Okay, so when it comes to taking charity, and right, this is how I'm going to explain Rabbi Akiva. Okay, when it comes to taking charity, so how much am I supposed to take? How much am I supposed to spend on Oneg Shabbat? Right? How much am I supposed to take? How much am I supposed to spend on Oneg Shabbat? Well, you can't give a percentage like we did in the beginning of the shiur with other mitzvos, right? A fifth of your money you should only spend, or you shouldn't spend too much. Well, it doesn't. Caramel popcorn costs pennies. It doesn't cost, it's a buck or two, right? It doesn't cost that much money. So you can't tell me how much I'm supposed to spend, right? The idea is that since there's no amount that I could ever point to when it comes to Oneg Shabbat, because it's completely subjective on each and every person, and it could be even subjective within the person from week to week. It could be subjective depending on what I'm in the mood to eat that Shabbat, right? So there's no amount that I could definitively say you should spend on Oneg Shabbat. So Rabbi Akiva comes along and says, listen, there's no way we could put an amount down as to how much you're supposed to spend on Shabbat, on Oneg Shabbat. It doesn't work. There's no way we could go ahead and do this. Therefore, what we're going to say is you don't have to borrow to fulfill this mitzvah. there's no amount that you have to spend to fulfill it, it doesn't make any sense for us to say that you should borrow to fulfill the mitzvah, because there's no amount that we can tell you to borrow. It doesn't make there's no measurements, there's no shiurim, there's no metrics with this thing. It's all subjective, it's all up in the air. So we're not going to tell you that you should borrow when it comes to Shabbat. It's better that you make your Shabbat a weekday. Maybe find some enjoyment in your weekday food, right? But there's no way we could tell you to borrow, because then ain't the davar sof. There's no end to this, right? I'll say, I should borrow. Okay, so I'm going to borrow a couple $1,000 and put on a wedding and a shmorg and everything, right? I'll have a guy cutting pastrami there at my Shabbos table. Right, so how are you supposed to know how much? So Rekiva says, listen, it's all subjective anyway. Since it's all subjective and there's no amount, we can't go ahead and tell you that you should borrow X amount of money to fulfill. Better to make your Shabbat a weekday than to go ahead and take money from charity for something that there's no way we can tell you how much to take. It doesn't make any sense. There's no end to this thing. You'll just keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. So I think that's the idea of what Rabbi Akiva is saying.
I was thinking along the lines of what Rabbi Akiva was saying. If the purpose of the food is to give you on Shabbat, if I go and borrow in order to have lots of good food for my Shabbos table, and I borrow towards that end, I'm going to be sitting at my table on Shabbat. I'm not going to enjoy it because I know that I had to borrow to get it.
Okay.
So therefore, don't borrow. Just have a regular weekday meal, and that will be your oneg.
Interesting. Okay, so by putting myself more into debt, the stress is gonna overtake. Okay.
Right.
That's an interesting idea. Okay.
Right.
I think that if we go back to the idea I said in terms of about this idea of it's subjective and we don't know if you should borrow or not, right? And that comes down to we had this troubling situation with the tour and the rush with the son and the father, right? Where the tour turns to his father and says, "Do you think I qualify to make my Shabbat a weekday Shabbat, right? That I made a weekday, right? Am I poor enough?" And the rush hesitated answering him. He didn't answer. He says, "Lo shiveni davar baror." So why not? So I think that's because it's all subjective. How should the rush have answered his son? Right? He says, let's see how much money you have based on how much money you want to spend. Right? The whole idea of owning Shabbat is so subjective and personal to each individual that the rush couldn't even answer the question for his son. Right? How is he supposed to answer? How is he supposed to answer for his son? He couldn't even answer this question for his son, because how is he supposed to help him understand? Right? There's no way the rush could sit down with him. Even if he had a balance sheet, the rush would be working off his own personal context, not the context of his son's situation. He doesn't know what his son likes to eat. He doesn't know how much each piece of meat is worth it for. So he couldn't give him an answer. Right? There was no way he could give him an answer, because there's just no way that you could answer this question for somebody else. You just have to turn to the person and say, "Listen, you got do your best here, right? Like try to figure it out. And that's what the rush gave to his answer he gave to his son. Okay. So how do we understand this Gemara that you can go ahead and take God's credit card to the supermarket and borrow? Right? How do we understand? It's such a weird Gemara that you could just put it all on God's credit card. God will handle it. It's fine. And then how does that work? All of a sudden you start getting more clients, right? Like there's Donald Trump puts in another spending surplus bill, right? Like all of a sudden the IRS starts giving out checks, and you're like, oh, there it is, right? God just paid me back, right? So how does it work? How are you supposed to understand this? So I don't think it's the literal Gemara. Obviously that's the direction that we're going to go in, right? The Gemara is not literal telling you to spend on God's account, right? But rather it's that the idea is that and it's also hard to imagine that you can assume that God is going to pay you back, and that a good financial decision is that you should go ahead and spend money to go into debt and assume that divine providence, Hashgacha, is going to step in, right? So that can't work. Rather, what's the idea here? Okay, and you see this by the Gra and Tosfos. They both don't take the Gemara literally. Okay, they say right. That's not the saying, right? They say that you should only, what they maintain is that you can only spend your regular amount, right? What the Gemara is telling you is that you should spend according to your regular the regular amounts that you're used to spending, right? And that's what the Gemara and Tosfos are saying here, that it's only if you don't have somebody that can pay you a way of paying back, or you don't have somebody to borrow from. What the Gemara and the Tosfos are telling you is what you should really be doing is relying on your normal ways of assuming funds, right? The normal ways of having funds. That's how you should go ahead and be able to afford Shabbat, right? You should go to your usual place where you borrow money, and you should go to the place where you should look at your financial statements and see how much money you're going to be able to bring in. That's how you should go about it. Okay, right. So okay. And that's why you can't rely on divine providence, because the average person cannot go ahead and rely on divine providence. Okay. To answer we have two questions left. To answer our question about whether or not you spend on Shabbat, and on Shabbat you don't go into debt, but on Yom Tov, what should you do? So this is what we're explaining, that on Yom Tov, since it's objective, right? So therefore, on Yom Tov, this is my own idea. I can't tell you that I'm 100% right. Okay, that's right. That I would say that on Yom Tov you should go into debt to be able to afford Yom Tov. That on Yom Tov, that since the mitzvah of Simcha has a set amount. Remember, we explained to Rabbi Kiva as saying that the reason why you make Shabbat like chol, like a weekday, is because it's subjective. So how are you supposed to go into debt? How much should you go into debt? Right, that's what you explained. But on Yom Tov, it's objective. You have to get meat. You have to get meat and wine, right? So that's how much you should borrow in order to have meat and wine. That's how much you go ahead and you borrow. You take charity funds for that. That's a set amount. There's a certain amount you should get, right? And that's and then you fulfill the mitzvah, Simcha on Yom Tov. So that's how you know. That's how you know how much you should have, and that you're able to go ahead and you're able to borrow. So I think that this Rabbi Kiva's line of Asay Shabbat Tzachol, it says Shabbos on purpose. I think that it means Shabbos, and it does not mean any other day. It does not mean Yom Tov. So on Yom Tov, I think that it's better to take money from charity than to go into than to make your Yom Tov like a weekday. I think the Yom Tov, you can't have your Yom Tov look like a weekday, okay? Because the mitzvah simcha is objective. Okay. Okay. Now, how do we answer the last question that we have here? Was how do we? And by the way, sorry, let me just throw in one thing as a proof to that. I want to bring up this Meiri, right, that we have here in source number 11, right? The Meiri said that it only works. This works. So you have to go ahead and borrow when it comes to Kiddush. When it comes to Kiddush, you're allowed to go ahead and take money from charities. What do you mean? What about Rabbi Kiva? Rabbi Kiva says you shouldn't. No, because here it's objective, right? The Meiri is saying, no, it's objective. You should, right? You should rely on the Kadosh Baruch Hu. You should go into debt. Why? Because there's a certain amount here, right? The Meiri understands it, that it's talking about Kiddush Hayom. It's talking about just the wine for Kiddush. If we're only talking about the wine for Kiddush, then it makes sense to go into debt, to rely on God as it is, right? I put it on God's bill because there's a certain amount I have to buy. I'm not going to spend, I'm not buying cases of wine for my Kiddush. I'm buying a very certain amount, a very specific thing for Kiddush. It's the same amount for every single person. Okay. Last thing here that we have. Okay, how do we understand? Two mitzvos that I have to go into debt for the Dal Kosos on Pesach and for the Chanukah candles? How does that make any sense, right? With two reasons it doesn't make any sense. The first one is because we saw in the very, very first sources, we saw it says you shouldn't spend too much money on mitzvos, right? That's the first problem. And the second problem we saw was that you should make it's better not to go into debt and to accept money from charity in order to observe Shabbat, right? So those are the two reasons why I would think that I shouldn't. But what do these two mitzvos have in common? And this is science fascinating. What do these two mitzvos have in common? Right? Pursue Nisa, right? They're in order to publicize the miracle, right? On Pesach, I have the Dal Kosos, right? Like everything on Pesach all ties into one theme. It's celebrating freedom. Why do I celebrate freedom? I'm celebrating freedom because I want to publicize the miracle of God emancipating us from the slavery in Egypt, right? That's the And then on Hanukkah, what's the idea? I'm publicizing the miracle of the military victory and the miracle that happened in the Beit HaMikdash with the oil, right? So that's what I'm doing. So when it comes to publicizing a miracle, okay, so then what this concept is so fundamental to halacha that I even have to go into debt to fulfill it, right? It's a fascinating concept, right? It's a fascinating concept. And when it comes to these two things, right? So then these two mitzvos, so I have to go into debt to fulfill it. It's an incredible thing, right? That's the incredible thing. On Shabbat, there's no idea of pursuing Nisa, right? On Yom Tov, there's no idea of pursuing Nisa, right? So therefore, I don't have to go into debt to fulfill those mitzvos, right? When it comes to Stucca, the Dal Minim, or the other examples that are given, there's no, I have no reason to go into debt. I don't have to do that. So that's the idea. Okay, that is the.
Is it possible to talk about? Is it possible to bundle these two mitzvos of Ner Chanukah and Kos Yain with Sudas Yom Tov? That they're all national, and I want to be part of the Am Yisrael celebrating, and therefore that's why I do these things.
Yeah, but then you have to go ahead and say every mitzvah has a national component to it, right? I don't have to go into debt to afford a korban like shlomim, right? I don't have to go into debt to afford to go into Yerushalayim. I don't know if I have to go. I'm saying, and there's a million national holidays that I'm going to be able to apply that national thing to. I'm not sure if I could go ahead and say though, about each one.
Right.
I don't know. Okay, so believe that there sometime this week I'll put out sources for the next topic, and then the video, and we'll meet next Sunday. Okay, a good chodesh, everybody. Shavua tov.
Shavua tov. Thank you, Rabbi.